when somebody does the salute that Hitler famously did all the time,
But he
that
didn't.
nobody else really does. Well, no, he did the Nazi salute, and he just did
But
it.
he didn't.
Okay, but you can see the video where he does the Nazi salute, and I was just curious what he was going for there. Hey everybody, my name is Cameron Kasky. This is the FYPod. This is an interesting week for us, folks. When Tim and I set out to examine what's going on with Gen Z, what the hell is happening, we knew that we were going to be speaking to some MAGA folks who don't see eye to eye with us, trying to figure out why MAGA is so popular with my generation and why young men in particular are so lost. So we knew that we would be speaking to people who didn't see eye to eye with us. What we didn't know is that we would be so lucky as to speak with Natalie Winters, co-host of Steve Bannon's Bannon War Room, a podcast or stream or some shit like that really sounds pretty interesting. And what we got was this conversation you're about to listen to, where some eyes are certainly rolled, some groans are definitely groaned, but you're going to be a lot smarter for having heard it. So stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome to FYPod. I'm Tim Miller.
I'm Cameron Kasky.
And we couldn't be more excited to finally have a MAGA youth on the podcast. Last week after we were talking about the government taking over the grocery stores, and seizing the means of produce production, we needed to balance it out with the fascist right represented as well. And so I'm excited to have with us Natalie Winters, Bannon War Room co-host and White House correspondent, 2 R's in correspondent, for the Bannon War Room. We all make mistakes. We all make spelling errors. Natalie, I am pumped about this. We've got to hang out before, which we'll explain to people in a little bit why that odd couple has got a test run. But Cameron and you don't know each other, so you're just meeting. And so I kind of just want to do first date questions at the top for Cameron and the viewers. Like, tell us about you. Where are you from? How did you become interested in Steve Bannon's triple-shirted soft authoritarianism? Just kind of give us a little rundown about you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm honored to, be making, I would say, my intentional Bulwark debut. I'm sure you've probably played clips of my show or Steve, but probably not non-consensually. Although you were actually on War Room earlier this week. I played one of your clips with Jeffrey Goldberg. But yes,
I heard about that. Somebody told me. I didn't. I try to listen, as you know, once a week. You guys put out like 20 hours of content a week. You're the only guys competing with me on total hour content, so I can't listen to it all. So I did miss that.
We are live for 1/6 of the day.
That's insane.
It's wild. Although I've started referring to War Room and Don't Tell Steve more as a live stream, because there's such a lack of preparation that goes into the shows. It's kind of haphazard, but we love it. Very, very populist. But yes, I'm Natalie. I have been Steve's co-host for about 2.5 years. I've been in Bannon War Room world for about 5. I started this whole journey interning for Steve's old co-host, someone by the name of Raheem Kassam, who's very involved in Brexit, kind of Nigel Farage politics. For some reason, when I was in
huge upgrade from you to Raheem. I've got a lot of problems with your politics, which we'll get to, but I got to say, you are a huge upgrade over Raheem. And for guests who are not familiar with Raheem, just count your blessings. And don't go searching for any information about him.
Well, I've been told I'm a DEI hire, which, it's nice, I guess. Although I guess DEI is over now. We ended it, right? It's done.
Okay, so watch out. You might get canned.
I might be on the chopping block. But yes, so for some reason in high school, and we'll probably get into those reasons, I became a huge fan of Raheem. I was very skeptical of the Islamicization of America. I was very skeptical of the Muslim Brotherhood. I thought they were trying to establish a new caliphate. Anyways, that was how I got really exposed to Raheem and decided that I wanted to intern for him the summer before I started college. So I started working for him, got very kind of wrapped up in Bannon world, and worked behind the scenes for the predecessor to what War Room is now, which was War Room Impeachment, as a staff writer. This was back when I believe the rule was no women in the war room, so I wasn't particularly allowed to go into the office. But I worked my way up to becoming the co-host, most recently when Steve was in prison, taking over at least the afternoon portion of the show. Try to put that on a resume. You can't. So I have a very interesting resume. I've only ever worked for Steve Bannon or Raheem Kassam, and I'm 24.
Wait, I'm sorry, real quick. I'm trying to get the timeline right.
Yes.
Which one was first? Was it the no woman rule or the prison?
Prison was post no woman rule, which I broke the glass ceiling of the war room, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Slay, queen.
Kind of like you're kind of the Hillary Clinton of the war room.
Minus the pantsuits. You know I'm very anti-pantsuit.
I don't know that. You have a lot of different types of outfits. I
know
that you don't tend to be
today. Today, this is my first suited up.
I was going to say, you are dressed up today. I watch your shows.
Yeah, MAGA had such a little hissy fit about Zelensky not wearing a suit. So if we were going to have a MAGA guest, I figured I might as well prevent the why aren't you wearing a suit conversation and do what Volodymyr could never do while he's protecting his country from Russia. So I suited up.
I appreciate that. I'm in a Beyonce B-Day tour tee to represent myself being an elder millennial, because B-Day was the seminal millennial Beyonce record.
No, it's you representing yourself being gay because you're the DEI hire of the Bulwark. So Natalie,
I had a couple other follow-ups about your bio there really quick.
Yes.
Yeah, before Cameron, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just can't let this go. You said in high school you became skeptical of the Muslim Brotherhood and a caliphate coming to America. I don't. That didn't turn out to be
not yet
a fear, a very worthwhile fear. I don't think. What talk to me about that? Why did you have that fear? Do you feel like looking back on it that was maybe misguided?
It is interesting because I do think a lot of these same think tanks and groups and sort of pundits who are very, very skeptical of the metastasization of the spread of Islam in America back then now sort of pivoted more into like the Chinese Communist Party is attempting to take us over. And now it's sort of morphed into like the World Health Organization, the United Nations. They're trying to usurp our sovereignty through pandemic treaties, take your pick. So I'm aware that politics is, sometimes people aren't always telling the truth. I guess maybe when I was in high school, I was maybe a little, I would say, overly radicalized on the issue. But I do stand by, I think, where I sort of came to that viewpoint from. I grew up in Los Angeles, and at least the high school that I went to was a very progressive, very far left. I kind of went to school with the children and grandchildren of kind of the Hollywood strain of like the elite. I hate that term, but for the sake of whatever, to be concise, that's probably what I describe it as. And I just sort of felt like the impacts of immigration, legal and illegal, were very detrimental to my kind of lived experience, as Steve would say, growing up, and that no one was really talking about it. I think there was sort of a whitewashing of the type of people that we were more or less importing into this country. And I thought that a lot of I think sort of looking to what was happening in Europe, particularly the UK, which I guess explains why I became so interested in Raheem and the concept of no-go zones, was something that I saw as a potential future for what could happen here. And I think to some extent, you've seen enclaves like that develop in, Minnesota, for example. I think it's not totally right-wing hyperbole to say that there are some no-go zones. I think we've seen police reports, but I'm not like a crazy conspiracy theorist. I don't think we're living under a Sharia law.
No, you're not a crazy conspiracy theorist. You're just suggesting that the Muslim Brotherhood became the Chinese Communist Party, became the
threat.
Health Organization.
No, I'm just saying like the right, I think, was very perhaps say maniacally or myopically focused on that being the threat at the time. Then that like conservative news industrial complex then pivoted to saying the Chinese Communist Party was the threat. And then it was during COVID, it was kind of like globalism and UN and WHO. That's what I'm not saying that they're all in the same. You could have a discussion about evolving global alliances, but I'm just saying from the conservative perspective of what the like premier threat facing the country was. I think that was sort of
one more follow up, then I'm just trying to get to understand. I'm trying to understand the core of you. You as a human,
spelled with one or two R's.
One R in that. People who don't miss this joke, Natalie did when she took the job as White House correspondent. She misspelled it as correspondent with only one R. I do misspellings all the time.
That was you.
It went viral. Yeah, that was her. And so we had a little running joke about how she was like the solid core respondent for the White House. Yeah. Anyway, but I'm trying to get to your essence, maybe the better word. So you're at a fancy high school in LA, like Sierra Canyon or something?
I went to Harvard Westlake. I know.
Harvard Westlake. Oh, would have been my second guess. So you're
at
Harvard.
So you're from the heartland.
I think we have a lot of mutual friends, Cameron.
We totally do. I'm sure.
Yes.
So you went to Harvard Westlake. You kind of just jumped straight from there to the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's like you're at Harvard Westlake. You said you're seeing your surroundings. What was it about that elite preppy LA school that made you think the threats of Sharia law are very acute to me in my life? So that's the part I'm not getting. Like, what were your experiences in high school in specific?
Sure. Well, I was a big fan of like Lawrence Southern, Milo, that kind of internet, like anti-social justice crowd of people. So that's what I was sort of saying about just like the evolution.
Because like your friends were too woke, like your friends at school. Like why did they appeal to you? Is what I'm trying to understand.
So this is like a longer story, which I'm happy to get into. But so my best friend growing up was actually the granddaughter of a very prominent Democratic senator who we'll probably inevitably discuss on this podcast. I don't want to dox anyone. But it wasn't like I was someone who was an ideological Puritan that couldn't hang out with people who I didn't agree with. I mean, Tim, I think you know this from our time at Turning Point USA. I'm not someone who particularly likes to talk about politics in my free time. Like, it's my job and I believe what I believe, but I'm not sitting around like discussing policy. So I had a very robust social life. But once, I guess it was probably 2016, right? When like everything became hyper politicized. I felt like because I didn't drink the Kool-Aid and sort of just support everything that Hillary did, I really liked Trump. I think I liked Trump more I mean, I was in 10th grade at the time. It was more just sort of like anti-establishment, wanting to be rebellious. That was what initially drew me to him. But I think that sometimes younger kids on the left have a hard idea or just ability to like internalize MAGA youth as anything other than a turning point MAGA hat wearing like hardcore activist. So I felt very typecast and sort of stereotyped as this like fire breathing hardcore MAGA person, which I guess ironically is what I've sort of become in my public facing career, right? But in high school, I was so not that. I think the thing that I said that really like nailed me as crazy MAGA girl, they were having a wage gap bake sale. And I remember someone had posted it in our class Facebook page, and I literally replied, it was just like, the wage gap doesn't exist. And anyways, it set into motion this whole thing where I sort of became known as the like crazy conservative girl on campus, which I know for your viewers, you're probably like, well, you were probably talking about the Muslim brother. I really wasn't. But so that was sort of my background. And then I one time I did, funnily enough, a podcast. It was called, I think it was some name that was a play on like being right wing. So I was under the impression that podcast, I could like say what I thought. And apparently what I said was really controversial. The school paper labeled it and deemed it hate speech. They held an emergency meeting with all the affinity groups, like the Black Student Union, the gay group, the feminist group. So I felt very ostracized at that point. And again, I'm sure maybe your audience would have a different perspective. What I said then, it wasn't anything that I think you'd be like, wow, that's actually offensive.
What? I mean, you just got to tell us what it was.
So I have tried, like, I'm an investigative reporter. There are no copies of it. The most offensive thing I said was, I think I jokingly was like, yeah, when Milo says feminism is cancer, like, haha, he's right. Like, that was the edgiest thing that I said. It wasn't like I waded into anything racial, culture, like it really.
No N-bombs.
No, Tim, no. But so I was very kind of, and this is not me like playing the, like whatever.
No,
like,
okay, no, we're trying to understand.
But so I'm just setting the stage, because then the same year that I was applying to college, and at Harvard Westlake, your equivalent of a social credit score was where you went to college, right? And the year that I was applying was the year that Operation Varsity Blues, if you guys recall, the kids on the rowers, like paying to get their underperforming kids in to college.
Oh, right.
Do you remember that? Like Olivia Giannulli, that whole thing. So I had gone to elementary school with all those people, and a lot of them were at Harvard Westlake. And that was sort of the same group of people who I had felt had attacked me from a more like ad hominem personal perspective of like, you're a sexist, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're just a bad person because of the beliefs that you have. And then behind the scenes, I thought from my high school kind of purview that they were doing something that was so immoral and unethical, where they were basically rigging, cheating the system. The same people who were saying that I was a racist because I said affirmative action maybe isn't the best policy. So all of that together, compounded with me being exposed to the Bannon-esque worldview, which I think is sort of the reorientation, not so much Democrat, Republican, but like elites versus everyone else, which I'm aware is maybe ironic given, where I'm from, but made me, I think, just sort of have what I always refer to as like a boomer worldview that's really in line with kind of the war room audience.
I feel like the real irony of the elites versus everybody else situation is that the guy that Bannon has been championing so aggressively that's sent to prison for the past couple of years has actually just handed the country over to elites. So that's kind of interesting. Like, the new Bannon, I hate to say that somebody stole Bannon's clout because he really totally had a ton of clout back in 2016. But Peter Thiel has kind of come in and stolen his bag. And Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are kind of the same guys that Bannon has been able to garner so much populist support for talking shit about. So now I'm sitting here. It's like, it's not the exact same thing as the H-1B visa drama, but I'm like, okay, well, what is MAGA right now? Like, is MAGA the party that's finally standing up to the elites, or is MAGA the party that is transparently being controlled by them?
I think that the inherent connection between elite and billionaire, though, yes, it seems sort of intuitive, I think is maybe a framing that our audience would sort of reject, in the sense that I think to them, their idea of what undergirds or represents the elite class is more sort of the swamp. So when you see, even though it's being done underneath Elon and DOGE, but when you see them going after to what their vision is, your average, Ivy League educated USAID contractor who's making millions of dollars promoting cultural filth, that's probably what they would describe it as, in third world countries. I think to them, that is sort of more their conception of the elite. I think it's almost less finance-based.
USAID employee making millions? Who are the multi-millionaire USAID employees? I'm so glad that I've gotten
my first Tim Miller eye roll.
Face? I'm just like, I didn't understand. So the millionaire USAID employee? Who is that?
The $1 million contracts.
But they go to, like, they get contracted out to like a group, to an NGO, and then people work for the group, and then it's people that are making like $80,000 a year that gave their life to go help the global poor. I think they're making a little more than $80,000 a year. Maybe a couple. I mean, but like, these people are not the elites. The people that are in fucking Africa helping. I'm not saying the people in Africa are the elites. I'm just saying I think that maybe. And I'm trying to help your audience understand. I mean, I want to understand. The back and forth, and we can debate. But I also think that the Bulwark listeners probably don't get so much of an insight like into what War Room listeners think. So I'm happy to try to convey that. But I want to hear it. I'm just trying to understand. That doesn't make sense to me. The USAID employees
I think
are the
that
elites that they're mad at. Why are they mad at them?
The War Room kind of Bannon worldview. I think that to us, there's more of like a cultural component to what we define the elite as, and sort of this idea of ivory tower beliefs. And I think that is USAID is maybe a bad example because there's a lot to get into there, but I'm just saying this sort of more globalist orientation, the idea that people would be making six figures promoting this sort of what I'm sure would be referred to as, woke ideology in these third world countries, or promoting gender rights in Africa, that I think the way that you guys sort of term elites, I think that there's an inherent conflation between money and being an elite, which I'm not saying is an inaccurate characterization. I just think, to answer your question, how I can sit here and say, well, we're anti-elite, but we also support the efforts of DOGE and what Elon Musk is doing, is because it's not just a money thing. I think it's sort of, there's an ideological prerequisite to be in the basket or the tier of people that the War Room audience, that myself, would consider to be an elite.
So gender rights in Africa, where's the elitism there? Like, because we got Elon Musk offering $1 million prizes to people who are going to vote the way that he wants them to vote in like Wisconsin or something. But that's not elitism. That's patriotism. Elitism is when we go to some country and promote gender rights, or like stopping the prevention of HIV. Like, where does the elitism come in there? Because I guess my whole thing is I've been seeing Bannon for so long, and a lot of the stuff he says, I'm like, Steve, I think you've got the wrong idea. But then he says the tech bro billionaires are a huge problem in this country, and I'm like, you know what, Steve, I think I agree with you on that. But now the tech bro billionaires kind of are the country, right? So what would Steve say? I mean, I hate to make you speak for him, but you're talking about the war room audience, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. That's cool. It's just the gender equality that's not cool.
Bezos.
I think each tech oligarch is sort of its own case. For example, I've been extremely critical of Mark Zuckerberg. Like, I think all the tech bros who are doing the MAGA performative dance, I think that's absolutely disgusting. And I think that our audience should have higher standards than accepting them back into the fold. I think the whole Bezos, whatever, is not very convincing to me. I think the Elon transition is a little more interesting and deserves a little more nuance to look at that. I would sort of reject, I think, some of the premise of your question, the idea that they have totally usurped our country and taken it over, only because I think there's an implication there that what they're doing is something that the American people don't support. And I think this idea that the DOGE agenda or that cutting waste, fraud, and abuse is something that is so anathema to the interests of the American people. And that's something that Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are force feeding down the throats. I think the Trump voters knew what they were getting when they were voting for Trump. I think Elon was very prevalently on the campaign trail. I think the concept of cutting waste, fraud, and abuse is not particularly niche. I also think that waste, fraud, and abuse is perhaps the more palatable, kind of simplified version of what, honestly, I think Bannonism in its kind of predecessor form, the idea of deconstructing the administrative state. I think that that's also the other side of the coin with DOGE, which I do think is something that is very important for our audience. But in terms of back to the Africa example,
you don't have audience you have audience that works for the government, though. I guess this is a genuine question. I know that I give off sarcasm face, so I'm going to verbalize. This is a genuine.
We haven't
question.
even told the audience that we don't actually dislike each other.
I know we're going to get to our Kari Lake encounter at the end. Okay. We're going to start with it, but all of a sudden we got
the Muslim Brotherhood. I dropped a bomb.
You dropped Sharia law, and you dropped Sharia law, and we went off a different.
With the Muslim brother thing.
Well, and I want to answer your question too, Cameron.
Hold on,
but yes,
but it's a related question. Okay. I'm adding on to Karen's question because what I don't understand is, particularly from the audience's perspective, we hear enough from Steve. I know what Steve's fucking perspective is. You have people in your audience, I assume, that work for the federal government that have federal government jobs that are on government healthcare, certainly. And I don't understand what they're getting out of this. I understand being mad about fraud and abuse and being happy that Elon is poking the eye of the people they don't like who care about trans people or whatever. But I don't get what they're getting so far. What are they I'm really happy that they've instituted some policy that's going to help me, because I see a lot of regular people losing their jobs, unlike people that are probably MAGA, people that are probably your audience. I don't know, if you work at the VA or you work at one of these places, you could very well be a war room listener.
You don't understand, Tim. Veterans are woke.
It's a lot of stolen valor. No, I'm kidding. No. I think to answer, and again, I have to say, by the way, I love being able to have actual discussions like this because I feel like so much is just screaming on panels. But yeah. I think the sort of juxtaposition there is that, we're all told, and perhaps maybe my characterization of every person that DOGE is firing as some woke USAID, Jen Psaki's sister who's promoting trans rights in Africa. Yeah, that's probably not all the people that they're firing. But I think you can also concede that there are some people who have received collectively their organizations millions of dollars promoting stuff that probably could be itemized as waste, fraud, or abuse. And I think maybe our audience is a little more hypersensitive to those issues, perhaps on the heels of what they feel is unaudited Ukraine aid packages and just billions of dollars overseas to the forever wars that they really dislike. But to answer your question specifically, and I live in DC, so I'm around a lot of people who've, listed their houses and have lost their jobs. The idea that I have to feel really bad about someone who loses their job, who for years has like not been going into an office. I sort of reject the ideological premise of their job to begin with, and they're probably getting an overinflated salary for like really not doing much.
How much do you think government employees make?
Let me finish. That the same, now we're getting a Tim Miller face palm. I'm very honored. But the idea that like I'm supposed to have unmatched empathy for them, but then our audience who, you know, really, I think, was forced to shut down their businesses during COVID and didn't see the outline, the really explanation or justification for that, and felt sort of assaulted in that way.
Well, you know, the Democrats tried to give them money, and the Republicans in Congress said, no, we're not going to do that.
And we hate Republicans in Congress. Most of them, they suck.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them are disgusting.
And
can I also say, too, this is perhaps a different tangent, as I have met more and more like DOGE adjacent people and sort of the more tech bro class, I think that a lot of the people, and honestly, Tim, I think it kind of goes back to your book, which is wonderful and it's very well written. And I think it's quite interesting how a lot of people who I think are in the MAGA movement or pretend to be MAGA, and even what you're sort of saying, Cameron, with a lot of these Republican members of Congress, it's all performative and it's all fake, and they are narcissistic and they do what they want to get ahead because they want to be on Fox, they want to have the soundbite. Most of the Republicans who are in the DOGE caucus on the Hill are then voting to continue spending at Biden levels and continue spending money, God knows where, whatever. Meanwhile, I think the DOGE crowd of people who have sort of come to DC, and in some ways, it's sort of like pick your poison.
You're talking about the big balls of the world. The guy that wanted to normalize Indian hate, right? Marco, those guys, those are the true believers.
That crowd, but I'm also talking even more at the higher levels, like just, I mean, like I said, I've been in DC for years now. When I go to the cocktail parties, it's just sort of, even though we're not allowed to go to the cocktail parties in Steve World and I don't drink, but there's just more of like a San Francisco transplant vibe here. You know what I mean? Like kind of the techie crowd. And I just think it's an interesting dynamic because I think traditionally a lot of the MAGA stuff, and it's what your book sort of talked about, like was people who were lying because deep down they did support amnesty, but then they saw where the trends were going in the Republican Party. So they pretended to be really hardcore on immigration. And I think that the people who are in DOGE, you're pulling from like people who actually want anonymity and are not trying to get ahead or advance their own career. They're genuinely doing the DOGE stuff. These are very high IQ, brilliant techie people who would probably rather be in San Francisco, like doing the coding stuff. They're all probably like,
does anybody in the entire world want to be in San Francisco right now?
I mean, have you been to DC? It's not particularly great, but I'm just saying I think it's an interesting like cultural difference between the tech
appeal.
They just want to actually, like, I literally met an autistic like DOGE man who literally, I tried talking to him. He asked me, like, if Steve and Trump, he's like, I thought they hate each other. I was like, that was like 5 years ago. Like, he was like, oh, I don't follow politics. I literally just want to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. And I was like, is this just shtick? He was like, no, I just care about the waste, fraud, and abuse. My point being, it's just a different, it's not political. Like, they would never have a group chat where they're like sending emojis. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just
Would they have a group chat where they're sending? Would they have a group chat where they're sending war plans by any chance?
No, because they wouldn't want to bomb the Houthis. They would just be like, "Who cares? We don't need to get involved in another thing." I'm just saying it's an interesting split, and it's cool to be here to watch. I know what
you're saying. I'm not exactly encouraged that the people that are just firing public servants willy-nilly are like autistic Vulcans that have no actual ideological bearing or care about our empathy, and they're just
it means they're willing to execute
do Elon's bidding
on what Bannon, I think, outlined in the first term, which is deconstructing the administrative state. And I think when you hear our audience,
I guess this goes back to my question: why does your audience want to deconstruct the administrative state? Because to me, your audience benefits a lot from the administrative state. What are they?
How would
what
you
are they
define
getting?
the administrative state? Like,
well, they get health care. Most of them are going to be on Medicaid or Medicare.
Steve has said he doesn't want to cut that.
Okay. Well, that's like a third of the government. Like they benefit from, other government services. If they're rural, they benefit from all the farm subsidies that we are giving, which are extensive. Like they benefit from Social Security offices. If they're veterans, they benefit from the VA. What is your audience getting out of firing a bunch of bureaucrats like that? I genuinely don't understand. Why do they want to deconstruct the administrative state? I don't get it.
Well, I think it's particularly profound now because I think it's on the heels of what we view as the weaponization of government under Biden. I'm sure the Bulwark listeners are rolling their eyes, but I think
you care very deeply about weaponization of government. I can tell.
Yes.
I'm seeing that in Cash and Pam Bondi.
Yes.
They're very
we signed
serious.
VEO. No, but I think that perhaps it's just maybe I think the way that we have messaged what the administrative state is not so much rooted in like, oh, it's the administrative state. I think that is bringing you your healthcare, which yes, to some extent it is. But I think Steve and we have been pretty consistent in saying we don't think that Medicaid should be cut. We don't think that coming after these benefits while a bunch of billionaires are going to be getting their tax cuts or their nice loopholes or whatever, that's something that's necessarily positive. We've been adamantly against that. And Steve has been against that since I think day one and fought very hard against some of the more, high net worth tax cuts in the first administration. That sort of more almost neo-Connie, neoliberal kind of rules-based world, all the buzzwords that Steve would use, like that to them is what represents the administrative state.
If you're angry at Hillary Clinton and like you, Natalie, for example, you're upset that people are calling you sexist in high school for saying that feminism is cancer, like how do we stick it to the administrative elites by cutting veteran benefits?
Well, I think that logic chain is not really what we're advocating for. I think that is a mischaracterization. I think when we say that we want to take down the deep state, the administrative state, I think it goes more sort of to the unelected, unchecked power and the fear. I think COVID
like Elon
confirmed
Musk, who was unelected and is unchecked.
But I don't think that he is unchecked. I mean, I think we've seen the courts sort of try to stop a lot of what DOGE has done. There are checks on him.
We're trying to impeach the judges that are trying to stop him.
But have they been impeached?
Elon Musk is literally paying people to impeach the judges. They're also going after private law firms.
Well, they're going after those law firms because, and I was going to get to that with, I think that what our audience kind of conceives of the administrative state, the deep state as being, I think, people like Mark Elias, firms like Perkins Coie, Covington Burling, where they see this sort of close relationship between what is government power and then private sector law firms sort of aiding and abetting, for example, special counsel Jack Smith, that collusion is something that they're very, very against. And frankly, too, I think it's quite hypocritical when you have, AOC and Bernie Sanders standing up there saying that they're putting American workers and families first. And when you go to AOC's website, the first page that you're hit with is like, know your rights, how to avoid being deported. I don't think illegal immigration has been particularly a boon to any American worker. And I think Obama's Economic Review Commission would agree with me as much on that. But I think the difference is that like Elon, for example, is very out there and not just puts his money where his mouth is, but puts his mouth where his money is. And again, I'm just explaining to you guys. You don't have to agree with me, but I think where
I don't. No worries.
It's okay. You will one day, Tim. One day you'll come on the War Room. No, you've been on the War Room.
I'll be back. I'll be
back when I thought you didn't like me.
I don't understand why a movement that is very hostile to the administrative state, very hostile to the deep state, very skeptical of government, is cool with the government just like sending 6 hooded, jackbooted thugs to like randomly take a lady off the sidewalk because she wrote a bad op-ed. I would think that your audience would be pretty concerned about that if that person had written an op-ed about whatever, Christianity or defend it, or pro-Russia op-eds. and Susan Rice and Anthony Blinken had sent a bunch of hooded people to take them off the street about their pro-Russia op-ed.
1,500 of our Jan 6. We don't have to get into Jan 6, but
well, there's a difference between writing an op-ed and storming a Capitol in one of the most embarrassing moments in U.S. history, because this young woman typed something on a computer and went clickety clack, and these people were scaling the walls of the United States Capitol. So let's not do that. Let's not do the Jan 6 thing, because that's just embarrassing enough, and our viewers deserve better. I'm just curious, like, why do we get to send masked thugs to arrest somebody for using this First Amendment that the Republicans only seem to care about when it involves using slurs and stuff, but it also involves political distance? Where do we draw the line?
You can say read now, no worries.
You can't
but
say
you can't say,
what if
but
you never stopped?
You can. But you can't say you can't say anything anti-Israel or in an op-ed, or else we're going to arrest you. Like, explain it. Like, why are you mad about that?
Well, I think that our audience, and even Steve, I mean, Steve went to prison, right? I don't think that our audience is immune to being on the receiving end of unchecked power of the administrative state of a weaponized DOJ. And frankly, I'm not going to sit here and say that and defend that, right? I can call balls and strikes. I don't think that I think freedom of speech is an important thing. And I think, honestly, I think people are too sensitive.
So you're anti the Tufts arrest? We have an agreement. We have our first agreement 36 minutes in. You're opposed to the arrest of that woman?
I wouldn't say that I'm anti in the same way that I think the Mahmoud Khalil one I'm more strongly in support of. I think there's a little bit of a distinction there.
Okay.
But I also
hold up. That is so interesting to me. What is the distinction?
Well, I think the other guy is, like, on record, he's very violent, radical extremist. I also think too.
Like what? What's on the record?
Well, I think he's belonged to a lot of groups that have talked about very positively what happened on October 7th, groups that have sort of intimated wanting to carry out similar attacks here in the United States. Again, I'm
sure there are plenty of people in the War Room audience who were on the 4chan threads that were talking about committing acts of violence towards me and the people who survived the Parkland shooting with me. Do you think that someone from the War Room ought to get disappeared because of what other people who might have been around them in certain groups have said? Or is it more that it's somebody's individual actions that speak for them?
Well, I would reject that characterization of the War Room audience. I actually think that, in a weird, probably horseshoe theory way, that they're really about being engaged in politics. And
you're right. They're about denying that the shooting happened in the first place. My bad.
I don't think that that's
I mean, certainly there's some overlap between the war. You had Alex Jones on.
I'm being a very good faith engager with you guys.
You had Alex Jones on. Certainly there are some, I guess what Cameron is saying is, like, certainly, like, there have been war room people that are part of groups where somebody else in the group has called, the people crisis actors and shootings. And, like, they're extreme. The point is there's extreme rhetoric in a lot of different corners of American society. It doesn't mean you can just take sides. Okay, right. So you can't just, but why? Okay. So then why can you just take somebody off the street because they were involved in a group that you don't like, or because they wrote an op-ed, or because they have tattoos?
I don't think that I advocated for that. I think
you did it for Khalil. You said for Khalil you were cool with it, but not for. I was explaining. I think
he's a lot more radical. But I also think that these whole processes, these cases, are all being worked out in the courts, right? That, like, there's a lot of people.
Not for the ones in San Salvador. We don't even know who's in San Salvador. We sent people to a foreign gulag. We don't even know who's there. The government won't tell us. We just have our friend Trisha, who is on Vivek's campaign, tweeting, "Trust us. Trust the government. These are bad people." That doesn't feel like a war room ethic.
I would have released the names of the individuals who were there to confirm and stand by what they were saying, that they were all Tren de Aragua members. I was in the press briefing room when they were being hammered on that. I think that they should have given everyone a fact sheet saying, here are all the people who were there. I think that when you're dealing with an invasion of 10 million plus people, and a lot of them being members of really bad criminal organizations, many like Tren de Aragua, rapists, murderers, pedophiles, the whole gamut. When you're trying to deport all of those people, it's not going to be perfect. and you're probably going to make some mistakes. And I'm aware, like in politics, you can't really admit that. It's probably like the cardinal sin. But yeah, there probably are going to be some mishaps. And I think the best way to combat that is transparency. And by identifying who's being deported, I think they need to increase the deportation numbers. I think they're way too slow. But I think it's about a question of balancing priorities. And if the answer is that, well, because we cannot effectively ensure that every single person that we deport is actually a member of Tren de Aragua, so therefore tens of thousands or thousands of really bad people with criminal records are going to be allowed to stay in the country. I think that that is just a balance that our audience, which you guys might disagree with, would rather say, okay,
Sure.
well, if there's going to be two people who are mistakenly deported, who, let's be real, the ACLU will probably sue on their behalf. They'll probably make it back here.
We can't now. They've been disappeared. We have no standing. I guess all I would say to your audience, we are going to disagree on this, obviously. My last thing on this is just, I would say, if you are opposed, if you want to deconstruct the administrative state and you don't trust the government and you're opposed to the deep state, then you should be really mad that this government is just taking people off the street and sending them to a foreign prison and saying, trust us. Because you wouldn't want the other side doing that.
So if we're deporting rapists, right? We have Conor McGregor, a foreign rapist, being brought to the White House to celebrate some stupid European country. I don't even know which one.
DE Ireland.
Why do you not like Ireland?
DE Ireland. We had to have a DEI celebration for Ireland. We had to cancel.
Yeah.
We're canceling Pride Month, but we're
But
keeping Ireland's
really.
DEI celebration. I don't get that.
So,
but continue.
If we're celebrating Mr. Donald Trump, who has some rape stories,
be careful what you say. You might get
himself.
sued. No.
Totally. If we are celebrating Mr. Donald has never been accused by many women of rape before Trump, for getting rid of the foreign rapists, what is it about importing Conor McGregor, a convicted rapist from another country, and the Tate brothers, who are convicted human traffickers from another country? Why do those foreign rapists get to come in, but the people who are supposedly rapists, because they've got some sort of random tattoo that has nothing to do with the gang, have to go out?
Well, I think, again, that's sort of an unfair characterization. I don't think that the Trump administration, despite the left-wing smear campaign that they were behind bringing the Tates here, I don't think that they were. I think Trump sort of said he had no idea what was going on. That wasn't something that they were advocating for strongly. But just because you bring someone who is a rapist to visit the White House, this is a great quote, but like that doesn't negate you from then being able to, I think all rape is bad. Like, I don't know which one, like that. I don't see how that precludes us from wanting to deport a bunch of foreign rapists who are actually residing within the country.
I mean, look, I'm against the San Salvador Gulag altogether because I'm an American. I believe every individual has rights and should be able to go through a judge. But I'd be happier if the Tate brothers were in the Gulag and the gay
But where's
makeup
the due
artist,
process for them?
that's what I'm saying.
Defending them, but shouldn't
the
you
gay
support
makeup
due process
artist?
for
Can we
everyone?
can we trade the
DC
gay
does need
makeup
better
artist?
makeup artists. So if he's
I'd like to
good-
trade the gay Nicaraguan makeup artist for the Tate brothers. That's just me. Cam, you got anything else on this before we move on?
I just had one more question because I know you guys have some shit that you guys want to talk about. So I was curious because I am so Bannon curious. I have so many questions about the guy, mostly because the number one thing I associate with Bannon, other than the
shirts,
these United States falling apart, is the conversation that he and Donald Trump had about the musical Phantom of the Opera. I don't know if that was on War Room, but Donald Trump came on Steve Bannon's podcast and spoke for 2 minutes straight about Phantom of the Opera in a really fascinatingly theater kid way that I will always find terribly amusing. But, I have been thinking a lot about Nazi salutes lately, not only because Elon Musk double tapped the Nazi salute. One wasn't enough for him. He had to do two. And then, of course, the ADL came out and said, LOL, he's just being awkward. And then he made Nazi jokes and the ADL said, actually, this is bad. But then Mr. Steve Bannon, happened to do a Nazi salute of his very own at, what was it, CPAC, the RNC, some shit like that. What did he mean by that? Like, what do you think he was going for?
Well, let me preface, Steve does not like anyone speaking on his behalf, so I just want to make this clear that I'm not at all speaking for him, because Steve can speak for himself. You guys shout him on the podcast. He, I think, unequivocally and repeatedly said that he was not doing a Nazi salute. I was standing next to him when he was giving all those interviews saying he didn't do that. And for those of you who know Steve well, when he supports something, he will support it. I think he has, called Breitbart the platform for the alt-right. He's like referred to himself as all these things that are edgy, and he's being, nuanced when he says these things. But I think he has no issue with saying things that he supports. It was not a Nazi salute. I don't think Elon's salute was a Nazi
Roman salute.
Yeah, but
he said it was a
to
Roman.
To be honest, if you want the real answer, Steve always has this. I'm not going to do it, but like he has this one hand gesture that he always does, and it is very salute-esque. That he always, it's like I don't know, it's how he like emphasizes certain points. And for whatever reason, I think when he was on stage, it was a little more like right angle-y than it usually is. I'm serious. I know this sounds like cope, but as someone who's watched a lot of his speeches, it wasn't really out of the ordinary. It's a movement that he makes a lot. And I just think in that news cycle, it was sort of seized upon. The rush to depict Steve as an evil Nazi, whatever, in the same way in high school, if those kids had been nicer to me, who knows how I would have turned out. But I just think that it's a very unfair characterization. And I don't think that it is very successful for your side. I don't think it helps.
When somebody does the salute that Hitler famously did all the time.
But he didn't.
Nobody else really does. Well, no, he did the Nazi salute and he just did it.
But he didn't.
Okay, but you can see the video where he does the Nazi salute. And I was just curious what he was going for there.
But he didn't do a Nazi salute. I mean,
okay, so he did a salute that just also, coincidentally is identical to the Nazi salute.
Say
it was just
hypothetically, say he had done a Nazi salute. Like, you really think Stephen K. Bannon, who, by the way, I think was behind the idea to move the embassy to Jerusalem on like the first day of the first Trump administration, someone who, believe me, they have gone through someone who's been on radio for years, they've gone through every single clip, every single show that man has ever done. There's never been some sort of, leaked audio, dossier, blah, blah, blah. This is what Steve said that was so anti-Semitic or racist. You really think that like Steve would throw away everything that he has done to, I would argue, build the most racially and ethnically inclusive, as he calls it, the multiracial, multi-ethnic working class. That's what he always says on the show. That
didn't they not even let women in?
That he would go out of his way.
We should go back to the no women war room. He would go
out of his way to reverse all of that. Someone who was explicitly advocated for maximizing the value of American citizenship, regardless of what race you are, regardless of all of that. That like his genius idea to fuck all that up would be to go on stage on CPAC and like do a Nazi salute. I mean, that's just.
Do you want me to tell you? I can tell you my theory.
Sure.
I can tell you my theory. First of all, I don't know how intellectual I consider Steve Bannon. Second of all,
he's a very intellectual and intelligent man.
For sure.
He does read.
Sure.
He reads way more. I will say, I'll side with Natalie on this one. Like, Steve reads more books in a week than the FBI and deputy FBI director have read in their entire lives. Like,
it's like a backhanded compliment.
Well, we know Cash has read at least one book because he wrote the January 6th children's book.
Yeah.
Other than that, and he wrote his own book, which is not exactly. If I got
you a copy for your daughter, would she read it?
No, thank you. I would not enter the home.
Okay, so my guess for what Steve Bannon was doing when he did the Nazi salute that's explicitly a Nazi salute is he saw that Elon Musk did it twice and that the right just kind of said, okay, pop off king. And he said, you know what? Since this trolling is going so well, I'm just going to do it too, because you could just do whatever you want now. Because you're telling me that Steve just, again, coincidentally, total coinky dink, has a salute that he does that if you put the video of his and Hitler's next to it, it's identical. And also coincidentally, Elon Musk did the same thing. So Hitler, Elon, and Steve all just randomly do the same thing with their arm that is famously associated with the Nazis. I think Steve was trolling because I think he saw Elon get away with it and say, hey guys, welcome to the new Republican order. We all get to do whatever we want, Nazi or not. My question for you, following up. Okay, let's roll with your
Question.
narrative.
It's a very leading question, but okay.
My question is, let's roll with your narrative that Steve was just like pointing at the sun or whatever the fuck. What would you
Much love, King.
What would the War Room audience say if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went up and did the same salute?
I don't understand what you're saying. I think they made memes of her
AOC
doing it.
Did the Roman salute.
Yeah, they made memes about it. Like,
I think that what we've learned here is that Cameron's convinced it was a Nazi salute, and you don't. I don't know how much more can be explored. Well, another thing that we've learned is that maybe had those Felicity Huffman followed the fucking rules, okay, and not tried to cheat our kid into USC, and had those other Harvard Westlake brats been nicer to you, who the hell knows? Maybe you'd be on MSNBC right now.
I love MSNBC.
So liberal kids out there, be nice, okay? And I want to and I want to transition with that be nice message into be like me. All right, use me as a model. I got to hang out with Natalie. I haven't had any impact on her ideology, apparently, after listening to today's wonderful podcast. But I was at the Turning Point USA event, as always. I interviewed Steve. No Nazi salutes during that interview, but we were in private, so who knows. And talked to Natalie afterwards, and she was like, let's go to who was it? Whose party was it? Who's that guy who does the dancing?
You invited me. That is an unfair.
I invited you?
Yes, I don't ever go to those events. And you were like, one of my friends is telling me that this is happening. Are you going? I'll go. If you go, like, would you want to go?
Who is the guy? James O'Keefe.
James O'Keefe.
It was James O'Keefe's event. Yeah. So we hung out at this event in Phoenix outside at a bar. It was fine. There's a little teasing, a little friendly joshing, some disagreements. The deplorables in attendance were confused about whether we were there together or not. A lot of ambitious young men came to flirt with you. And then I'm curious what you thought at the highlight of the evening when the new head of VOA, which doesn't exist anymore, so it's really a nice job for her, Kari Lake, the two-time failed candidate, just like started screaming at me. She was not modeling the type of behavior that you're looking for. So, talk about that. That was quite it was quite an adventurous evening, I thought. And then we also got to watch Milo and Laura Loomer yell at each other.
Well, for starters, you got to go back to the AmFest prior to that AmFest, where you were also again interviewing Steve, and you had walked through the hallway, and you ignored me, and I thought that you hated me. And then I was like,
that's a good assumption.
You were so
a good base assumption.
you were so mean. I was like, oh my gosh.
I was focused.
Yeah. Well, it was like a post Steve high where you have to process everything. But yes, we hung out in the bar. I believe War Room covered your tab. Okay. I'm very nice.
Is that true?
Yeah,
I don't know if that's
true. I put it on my room.
Is that true?
Yes.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh wait, at the bar? Not at the James O'Keefe party.
Well, I don't drink,
downstairs.
so yeah, you wouldn't.
Yeah, I cover myself. That's true. I appreciate the War Room listeners for paying for my.
I'm giving the color, and then I'll answer your question.
Okay,
there were
great.
a lot of people who thought that Tim and I were dating at this party, which shows you they need to watch more MSNBC. And some remember the guy who pulled me aside was like, "Don't be embarrassed of the age gap." Like you guys
between you and me.
They thought
ouch,
he thought you were like
kind of
50.
a neg.
Yeah.
You thought I was 50?
Yeah.
We
Okay.
can't do this. This has been too much of a thing with Tim this week. Is his own mortality?
My mortality is tough. Okay. Well, I mean, the fact that people thought we were dating, I guess, the plus for me. Even though the fact that they thought that it was like a press secretary Caroline Leavitt and her 100-year-old husband situation is a little less good. But okay, we could have had a Carville Madeline thing.
We could have.
If only I was straight.
I know. And I guess if I hadn't been so radicalized on Sharia law, a girl can dream. But no, let's see. I'm going back to that event. Well, to be honest, I don't really particularly like going to those events, not just because I get mobbed, but I do think in the same way that some of your left-wing people in person can be a little radical, there's some radicalism with some of those attendees too, and I don't
Yeah.
ever want to be a witness in some case. No. But yeah, Kari Lake really does not like you. I don't understand. See, I have a very different approach to all this. Maybe it's because I'm a 24-year-old girl, maybe, and I don't know which variable there is more salient, the age or the girl, but I don't really hate anyone. Maybe I'd put the people that I identify as belonging to the deep state, but I love watching MSNBC. Yeah, well, I would love to get dinner with Norm Eisen. If I could get dinner with anyone, living, dead, alive, my answer to that question would be Norm Eisen.
But when you saw Kari approaching me, like an angry Bravo mom, like what did you think? I mean, did you think
I didn't
that
think she was going to attack you? I don't know. I think, Steve, I have always I think
you did back away?
Well, I didn't want to get in trouble for being the person who brought you there, which I guess that's why I'm now coming on a podcast to disclose it. No. But I think Steve has a very amicable relationship with most people in the mainstream media, which I think is maybe something that our audience would sort of find hard to believe. I just don't think it's worth getting worked up over.
She was worked up.
Hating people on a personal level, it's not worth the cortisol spike. That's sort of my personal.
Her cortisol was high.
We're about Maha here. Yeah, I really, honestly, I prefer talking to people that I disagree with.
You could tell she lost the encounter because the tape wasn't revealed. She didn't. She never publicized the tape, but she thought she won the encounter.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Say I had gone to the left-wing equivalent of whatever that event was, which I've struggled to understand what the left-wing equivalent of a Turning Point type event would be.
We're not good enough at organizing to have something like that.
There isn't one, and it's a big problem. And I complimented.
Now that all the USAID money is gone, you guys.
I gave a very reluctant compliment to Charlie on this very point in my article about the Kari Lake attack.
Well, Charlie also has a lot of money coming from some curious places, so he's got a little bit of a jump start on it.
Well, the guy that died of COVID, who was the original founder of TPUSA, we don't really talk about him. It's not like a Keir situation where you put his statue up at Turning, not you personally, where his statue is put up at Turning Point USA. It's kind of we kind of don't want to remember the fact that the old guy that started Turning Point USA died of COVID.
Turning Point when I was growing up.
I know that I wasn't
just
pointing
saying, I
at
was
you,
not,
Natalie.
Into
saying it is noteworthy that the person that founded Turning Point died of COVID, and that we just pretend like it didn't happen because COVID was a hoax.
Look, I can talk about COVID, but I think you guys are
running out of time.
Me with being on YouTube, which is an experience I don't usually get because Forum is banned on
you're
YouTube.
Banned.
But no, I was just curious,
Welcome.
How you think I would have been received in the alternate transposed universe.
Cam, how would Natalie be received at a March for Our Lives event?
You think I know shit about March for Our Lives, dude?
Just because
I literally founded it doesn't mean I know anything about it.
How would she be received at some lib thing that you go to, like a Charles Schumer press conference or whatever? How would she be received?
I don't know. I really don't know which MAGA voices people my age are actually that aware of, right? I know that they'd probably mob Charlie Kirk. I know that they would
get yelled at.
Mob Ben Shapiro. It's hard to mob Ben Shapiro because it's hard to find him in a room. He normally is behind somebody.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. People, I feel like people on the left are quicker to get emotionally upset by people on the right than vice versa. And that's because people on the left are so often more compelled by morals than they are by lower taxes and ending woke. So I have a lot of conservative friends who really like having liberal friends because they're not bought in emotionally the same way. Their politics are inspired by the fact that they don't want Black Disney princesses anymore. And, the fact that they think they're going to be paying less money in taxes and that the economy is going to be better, despite the fact that the economy is tanking. Whereas people on the left, so much of why they believe what they believe is the desire to have autonomy over their bodies and the desire to build new opportunities for people from different communities who otherwise in U.S. history have been affected by systemic racism, things like redlining, things like discriminatory job hiring, things that actually created issues creating generational wealth for people of color. So people on the left, I think, so often are driven by a moral belief system. Whereas I think people on the right saw enough posts of Pepe the Frog saying the N-word and said, wait a second, there's somewhere for me. But you touched on something that I think is really interesting that speaks to something I talk to a lot of young people on the right about, which is the idea that social ostracization because of certain political beliefs is what radicalizes people and puts them on things like the Bannon War Room. Because you said, for example, you were mischaracterized, and I can't imagine how you were treated by the Harvard Westlake kids, because I know a lot of Harvard Westlake kids, and the best of them are the finest people I've ever met, and the worst of them, there's going to be a 10th circle of hell built just for those rotten fucking scumbags that you see at Saddle Ranch. But the idea that certain social groups have adopted wokeness and people feel like there isn't a place in those circles for them might turn them farther to the right. Like when you were talking about Tim, and the first time you met Tim, you said, and I thought you didn't like me. And I think that points to a more interesting phenomenon of like how many young people that are on the right because they didn't feel socially accepted by the wokesters. And then what was originally like, I can't sit at the same lunch table as the kids who are more woke, turned into, well, now women can't get abortions. Well, now a 22-year-old named Big Balls can gut the Veterans Affairs. I think there is a little bit of a domino effect of feeling socially isolated, turning into we need to disappear people off the streets and send them to prison for expressing their First Amendment values. And I'm wondering, what do you think that means? Young people turning to the right because of that sort of social ostracization?
Well, I'd be curious if the reverse would happen. For example, like say I had grown up in a very conservative small town and I just wanted to be sort of innately rebellious or whatever. I didn't vibe with them. Like if there's a similar thing, or if you think that paradigm is something
you would
that
have become non-binary. You would be non-binary
oh my
right
gosh,
now.
I would have become trans in an alternate.
You would be non-binary.
But no, I'm curious. Genuinely, I'm asking, like, do you think that is a symptom of something that is more like of a right wing bent and ideology, or do you think that as society has just become more, I think, politicized, where you feel like you sort of have to like get involved because you can't, what is it? Silence is violence, or you have to be an ally or whatever. That like that kind of cultural thing has made people feel like they have to pick. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think liberalism and progressivism is about community and conservatism is about isolation. So when you're talking about silence is violence, you're talking about people pressuring other people to step up and get involved with certain social issues. I think there's a principle at the center of that, which is things can be achieved when we come together. Whereas at the center of conservatism is things can be achieved when you stand up for yourself. And that can very easily lead to things like isolation and social isolation. And it's hard not to say that social isolation is the major contributing factor to young men turning to the right, because this dramatic shift that we've seen of late started with COVID when we were all very isolated. And social media has made us more isolated, and young men feel less opportunity than ever to connect with other people, to make friends, to meet young women, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think, just back to the social ostracization point, it is isolation that drives people to the right more than it drives people to the left.
I think it's easier to talk about this from Natalie's perspective if we're not like obsessing over Harvard Westlake, but like going back to the Turning Point event with all of the, like, it's not a wrong observation that Cam is making that, for me at least, that at least a certain percentage of the younger men that were like super excited to be there and to meet you, like, seemed like social isolation might be part of their life. No? Do you feel like there's kind of a loneliness among some of them?
I don't know. I don't know if I would describe it as loneliness, because I think maybe the places where conservatives find community are maybe just a little different, I think, from where people on the left. In other words, I think church and like religious life is something that is a lot more important, which is sort of a different sense of community. But I definitely think, feeling sort of locked out or removed from like mainstream popular culture will sort of force you onto the conveyor belt of like pursuing alternative news sources, media sources. I always joke like Ben Shapiro was my gateway drug and I ended up at Steve Bannon. But I just don't know if there's an inherent political connection, because I think conversely, right, Turning Point represents a sort of newfound like social scene connection, right, for a lot of young people. I think that on the left wing side of things, I think that like your politics is more intimately linked with your whole persona, right? Like it's like you were saying, it's more rooted in.
There are no hats.
Well, there's the pink hats. No. I'm just saying like it's more rooted in, I think, a desire that you think you're doing good in a way that maybe we would disagree with what that actual outcome is and how you achieve it. But it sort of becomes your whole persona. Whereas I think for me, it was like I have my political beliefs, but they're not my whole identity. And I just sort of felt like within the school setting, it's like you're either the like hardcore campus Republican, like one of those crazies, or you're apolitical, or you're like some hardcore lib. Like there just wasn't really any gray area. So then I guess maybe you become the projection of what people are believing that, you know, you become. I guess in my case I did.
I was going to say I have a bit of a personal experience with that too, because there was a period of time where I was driven rightward in my politics. I can't say I ever got to the point where I was like, women shouldn't be allowed to do abortions. And I can't say that I got to a point where I was like, you know what, there's too many black people in colleges. I can't say I ever got there. But Ben Shapiro was very much a gateway drug for me as well. I loved watching Ben Shapiro. Oh my God, the fact that there was this guy who was telling me things I wanted to hear about how a lot of societal things are not my fault. They're actually the fault of woke and women and things like that. And he was spitting Stephen Sondheim lyrics. And, you know, I mean, it like Steve Bannon and Trump talking about the fucking gondola in Phantom of the Opera. But Shapiro really resonated with me. And the reason I was asking you about the social isolation thing is that it was because it was at a time when I felt more isolated from the people around me than ever, because I had just left March for Our Lives, an organization that I founded, and I had put so much of my life into this left-wing activism stuff. And then after Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and all these people who actually qualify as elites, unlike the fucking US aid workers.
I'm not giving you that one.
when those people told me and my friends that we were going to make a difference, and then, oh my God, turns out we didn't. And, you know, some state level laws got passed and there was an Office of Gun Violence Prevention for 25 minutes. You know, I got very jaded and cynical because I said, you know what, the Democratic side of politics is filled with liars. And the thing about the right that resonated with me was the fact that these guys are straight up going to be the villains, but God damn it, they are telling you exactly who they are. People on the right were the first people who told me in a couple of years, nobody's going to give a shit about Parkland. And that really resonated with me because that was a thought that I had the whole time. While all of these Democrats in office were saying, you kids are going to make a difference, we're going to remember your legacy forever, blah, blah, blah. There was this voice in my head that was like, these guys are full of shit. And then finally, people on the right said to me, guess what? The Democrats were going to use you for political gain. And then as soon as you weren't expedient for them anymore, they were going to leave you behind. You know, that I was like, finally, someone's speaking the truth to me. But the thing that made me flirt with this right-wing ideology in a way that I started to connect to, and then I started making friends on the right, and I started realizing that people on the right want to be friends with people on the left more than vice versa. You know, that all came from a period of time when I felt excluded and left out and alone. So that makes me wonder how many young people who have turned to the right have the same reasoning.
I think we might have found a way to close there, because I don't know that Natalie agrees with you on that, on the whole rationalization, on the whole reasoning for why people turn to the right. But you guys, did you notice that you guys have an origin story together? You both became ideologically moored to pretty, on opposite sides in high school. You both were let down by establishment politicians, and that has radicalized you further.
And we're both on a podcast with Tim Miller.
And now you're both on a podcast with me. So you guys both have that in common. You've both been let down by politicians. And I'm here as the elder to say, you know what, guys? 50-year-old elder. You know what, guys? Compromise is okay. Progress, micro progress is okay. That's good. It's the American system. Don't get so down about it. All right. You don't need to, you don't need to go full Bannon, Natalie. Let me bring you back. Okay. Moderate republicanism is nice. It's very cozy. Spencer Cox is out there in Utah. He's like,
I don't care how good Phantom is. We need to have some other conversations.
We're going to close really quick with Boomer Mailbag. Very fast, just because you mentioned it. I thought we could end on a nice note. Marla is a grandma, she writes in. Have Gen Zers written off religion and or church attendance? I myself have pulled way back, only going when the music ensemble I play in performs. It's nice, Marla. It has definitely left me in the nihilism space. So there you go. You had mentioned church. Is that really true, though? Are the MAGA kids? Because I see the MAGA kids as being more secular than like the old school Christian conservative kids, but maybe that's wrong. You're the ones that are around them. Are you getting invited on church dates? Is church happening?
I think there's sort of a split. I think traditionally my sense on it was there's more of an overlap, but I think now there are a lot more people who have been pulled into it from sort of the secular angle who are just sort of like anti-globalism, anti-elite. I want to be able to buy my first house. I don't know about the numbers because it seems like every other week there's an article that's like church attendance is at all-time low. The country's going to collapse. And the next week the article is like young people are having a spiritual revival. So I don't know who's doing those polls.
Have you been invited on any church dates?
Church dates? No.
You're after one of the secular young men. Cameron, do you know a single person who's a weekly church attender?
No, I don't think so. I know some people who will go to church for holidays.
Yeah, right.
And I know people in my Jewish community who go to synagogue pretty frequently, but I don't know. I tap out of conversations when God comes up. I'm just like, okay, do your thing, believe in whatever book you believe in. I couldn't find it less interesting. There's almost nothing I find more boring than people's religion, other than the fact that they ought to be free to pursue whichever one they like.
You people need to find God. All of you and all your friends need to find God. Okay. Find love. All right. Get some love and empathy. All right. We can all just, coexist. That's what the bumper sticker says, Natalie.
With the guns. Coexist. I like the one with the guns.
Okay. We'll leave it there. That was FYPod. Let us know if you want to have any MAGA guests back ever again. My guess is going to be maybe. We'll see y'all next week, Natalie, and we'll see you around the bend.